Working the night shift at a hospital had never been my first choice, but it paid the bills, and I'd grown somewhat accustomed to the eerie stillness of the late hours. That was until one fateful night when an encounter would change my life forever. It was a particularly quiet evening, with only the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the distant beep of medical equipment to keep me company. The occasional footsteps of fellow nurses and the rustle of paperwork breaking the silence were welcome distractions. However, as the night wore on, a sense of unease began to creep over me. Around 3 a.m., I received a call from one of the patients in room 307. Mr. Jenkins, an elderly man, complained of severe abdominal pain. I grabbed my medical kit and made my way to his room, expecting the usual routine of checking vitals and administering pain relief. As I entered the dimly lit room, I was struck by the sight of Mr. Jenkins, sitting upright in bed, his eyes wide with terror. His frail hands clutched the bedsheets and sweat beaded on his wrinkled forehead. I asked him what was wrong, but he could only manage a hoarse whisper. "They're here," he muttered, his voice trembling. "In the corners of the room, watching." I scanned the room, my heart pounding in my chest. The corners of the room were shrouded in darkness, and I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. I reassured Mr. Jenkins that it was just his imagination playing tricks on him and administered the pain relief. But as I turned to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. It was as if a pair of unseen eyes followed my every move. I tried to dismiss it as exhaustion, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. Over the next few nights, I encountered similar instances with different patients. Each one claimed to see shadowy figures lurking in the corners of their rooms, their eyes filled with terror. I couldn't explain it, and it sent chills down my spine. One night, as I made my rounds, I noticed a new patient, Sarah, in room 312. She was a young woman, no older than 30, but her eyes held a haunted look. She beckoned me closer and whispered, "They're coming for me, in the corners, watching." I approached the bed, my unease growing. The room felt colder than the rest of the ward, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister lurked in the shadows. As I leaned in to reassure Sarah, a sudden gust of icy wind rushed past me, extinguishing the bedside lamp. The room plunged into darkness, and Sarah's terrified scream pierced the silence. Frantic, I fumbled for my flashlight and shone it around the room. My heart nearly stopped when I saw them, shadowy figures, their eyes gleaming with malevolence, crowded in the corners of the room. They seemed to be closing in on Sarah, who clutched the bedsheets in sheer terror. With trembling hands, I reached for the emergency call button, praying that help would arrive in time. But as I pressed it, a guttural whisper echoed in my ear. "No one can save her now." The figures drew closer, their forms shifting and contorting in the darkness. Sarah's screams grew louder, and I could do nothing but watch in horror as they enveloped her. The room was filled with an otherworldly presence, and I felt a crushing weight on my chest. Suddenly, the door burst open, flooding the room with light. It was the night shift supervisor, followed by 2 security guards. The shadowy figures dissipated like smoke, leaving behind only a lingering sense of dread. Sarah was rushed to the intensive care unit, her condition critical. I tried to explain what had happened to my supervisor, but my words came out as disjointed ramblings. He assured me that it was just a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and stress. Over the next few weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in that hospital. Patients continued to report strange sightings, and the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. I began to doubt my own sanity, wondering if I was the one losing touch with reality. One night, as I made my rounds, I entered the room of an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson. She was bedridden and frail, her eyes sunken and distant. I approached her to check her vitals, but she gripped my arm with surprising strength. "You must listen," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They're not hallucinations, they're real, and they're coming for all of us." Before I could respond, a flicker of movement caught my eye, a shadowy figure lurking in the corner of the room. I turned to face it, my heart pounding. Mrs. Henderson's grip tightened, and she uttered a single word: "Run." I didn't hesitate. I bolted out of the room, leaving behind the eerie presence that had haunted me for weeks. As I sprinted down the dimly lit corridor, I couldn't help but wonder if Mrs. Henderson's warning was too late. The night shift had taken a sinister turn, and I feared that there was no escaping the darkness that had descended upon the hospital. To this day, I can't explain the encounters I witnessed during those night shifts. Whether they were hallucinogens or something more sinister, I will never know. But one thing is certain, I'll never forget the chilling feeling of being watched in the corners of those hospital rooms, and the disturbing encounters that continue to haunt my nightmares.
Working the night shift at the Desolation Motel was never a pleasant experience. Tucked away in the remote countryside, the motel was a haven for weary travelers looking for a place to rest their heads. Little did I know that my time at the Desolation Motel would become a nightmarish ordeal I'd never forget. The motel was a rundown establishment, its once vibrant neon sign now a flickering relic of the past. As I settled into the front desk, the dimly lit lobby felt cold and unwelcoming. The antique furniture seemed to creak and groan with every gust of wind that seeped through the cracks in the walls. My shift began like any other. I checked in a few late-night arrivals, exchanged pleasantries with a truck driver, and watched the minutes drag by on the ancient wall clock. The motel had a reputation for being haunted, and some guests even claimed to have seen ghostly apparitions wandering the corridors. At around 2 a.m., a man entered the lobby, his face obscured by the hood of his jacket. He signed the register as John Doe, and I handed him the key to room 113 without much thought. The motel was nearly empty, and I had grown accustomed to the occasional mysterious guest. A few hours later, the lobby phone rang, jolting me awake. Groggily, I answered it, expecting a guest with a request or complaint. The voice on the other end was shaky and filled with dread. "Please, you have to help me," a woman's voice pleaded. "I'm in room 113, and there's something in here with me." My heart raced as I grabbed the phone, trying to calm the frantic guest. She claimed to have heard strange, guttural whispers and seen shadows moving in the corners of the room. My training kicked in as I assured her that I would come to investigate. I grabbed the spare key to room 113 and made my way down the dimly lit corridor. The motel's shabby carpeting seemed to absorb the sound of my footsteps, creating an eerie silence that hung in the air. The closer I got to room 113, the more the atmosphere weighed on me, like a tangible presence. As I stood in front of the door, I hesitated for a moment, the woman's terrified voice still echoing in my ears. Taking a deep breath, I inserted the key and slowly turned the handle. The door creaked open, revealing a room cloaked in darkness. I flicked on the lights, revealing a scene that sent a chill down my spine. The room was in disarray, furniture overturned, and the air thick with an acrid smell. The bed sheets were in tatters, and the walls were adorned with strange symbols etched in red. The woman who had called was huddled in the corner, her eyes wide with terror. She pointed toward the bathroom, where a flickering light revealed an open hatch in the floor. It led to a dimly lit underground chamber that seemed to stretch on forever. The woman claimed that something had emerged from that hatch, something that couldn't be described in words. She had fled the room in sheer terror, leaving behind her belongings. With a trembling hand, I approached the hatch and peered into the darkness below. My flashlight revealed a labyrinthine network of tunnels, each one seemingly leading to more darkness. An oppressive feeling washed over me, as if I were being watched from the depths. I helped the woman out of the room and called the police. They arrived shortly and searched the tunnels, finding no trace of the mysterious entity. The woman was traumatized and left the motel, vowing never to return. The incident was unsettling, but it was far from over. Over the next few nights, I began to notice strange occurrences throughout the motel. Doors would open and close on their own, and whispers echoed in the corridors. Guests complained of feeling a presence in their rooms, and some even checked out in the middle of the night. One night, as I made my rounds, I heard faint crying coming from room 113. My heart sank as I approached the door, fearing the worst. When I opened it, the room was empty, but the hatch in the floor had been left wide open. I descended into the tunnels, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The labyrinth seemed to stretch endlessly, twisting and turning in all directions. I called out, but my voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence. As I ventured deeper, I came across a chamber unlike any other. The walls were covered in symbols and markings, and an altar stood at the center. Atop the altar lay a gruesome sight, a collection of human bones arranged in a grotesque pattern. A voice echoed in my mind, chilling me to the core. "You should not have come here." I turned to see a shadowy figure emerge from the darkness, its form indistinct and ever-shifting. I tried to run, but an unseen force held me in place. The figure drew closer, its malevolent presence washing over me. I awoke in my motel room, bathed in sweat and disoriented. It had all felt so real, but I couldn't be sure if it was a dream or a memory. I glanced at the clock and realized that my shift was over. As I left the motel that morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something dark and ancient lingered within its walls. The Desolation Motel was a place of dread and despair, a place where the line between reality and nightmare blurred. To this day, I wonder about the mysteries that lie beneath that forsaken motel, and whether I had truly encountered something beyond our understanding during those long, eerie night shifts.
The night shift at the rundown petrol station had always been a lonely affair. But that night, a sense of foreboding hung in the air, as if the universe itself knew that something unnatural was about to unfold. I settled into my usual spot behind the counter, the dim fluorescent lights above casting eerie shadows on the shelves stocked with snacks and cigarettes. The quiet hum of the refrigerators and the occasional distant rumble of a passing car were the only sounds that broke the silence. As the hours ticked by, my eyelids grew heavy, and I struggled to stay awake. It was nearly 1 a.m. when the unsettling feeling of being watched roused me from the brink of sleep. I scanned the empty store, my eyes darting from one corner to another, but there was no one to be seen. I dismissed it as paranoia, a side effect of working the night shift in a desolate location. But the feeling of unease lingered, gnawing at the edges of my consciousness. Around 2 a.m., the petrol station's entrance bell jingled, announcing the arrival of a customer. I snapped to attention, grateful for the distraction. The man who entered was tall and gaunt, his face hidden beneath the shadow of a hood. He wore a long, tattered coat that seemed out of place in the warm summer night. He approached the counter, his movements slow and deliberate. His eyes, obscured by the hood, bore into me with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. "Fill up pump 3, he said in a voice that was barely more than a whisper. I nodded and rang up the sale, my fingers trembling as I handed him the receipt. The man paid in cash, his long, bony fingers counting out the bills with an unsettling precision. As he turned to leave, I couldn't help but notice the strange symbols etched into the palm of his hand, dark and cryptic. Before I could inquire about them, he vanished into the night. With an uneasy feeling settling in my gut, I returned to my seat behind the counter, my eyes darting nervously between the surveillance monitors. The figure's appearance had only intensified the sense of dread that had plagued me throughout the night. As the minutes stretched into hours, my anxiety grew, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The sensation of being watched returned, stronger and more suffocating than before. Around 4 a.m., a car pulled into the petrol station, its headlights cutting through the darkness. I squinted at the approaching vehicle, trying to make out its details. The car was battered and dented, and the driver's side headlight was smashed. The driver's door opened, and a woman stumbled out, her movements erratic and unsteady. Her clothes were disheveled, and her face was pale as a sheet. She approached the counter, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Please, you have to help me," she pleaded, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I don't know where I am, and he's been following me." I offered her a chair and a glass of water, my heart pounding in my chest. She explained that she had been driving for hours, trying to escape a man who had been pursuing her relentlessly. She had lost him temporarily, but had no idea where she was or how to get home. I tried to reassure her, offering to call the police or a friend to pick her up, but as I picked up the phone, a chill swept through the room, and I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. The woman's eyes widened with fear, and she pointed toward the entrance. I turned to see the hooded figure from earlier standing just beyond the glass doors, his hood pulled low over his face. He seemed to materialize out of the darkness, like a specter brought to life. I rushed to the entrance, my heart pounding, and flung the doors open, intending to confront the intruder. But when I stepped outside, He was nowhere to be seen. I scanned the empty forecourt, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The woman was trembling, her eyes locked on the spot where the figure had stood just moments before. She implored me to call the police, her voice quivering with fear. I nodded and picked up the phone, my fingers fumbling with the buttons. Before I could dial, a whisper brushed against my ear, chilling me to the bone. "You should not have intervened." I whirled around, but there was no one there. The woman was gone, and the petrol station was once again empty, bathed in the cold light of the moon. I called the police, but they found no trace of the woman or the hooded figure. It was as if they had vanished without a trace, leaving only questions and an overwhelming sense of dread. In the days that followed, I couldn't escape the feeling that I had stumbled upon something inexplicable and malevolent that night. The figure, the symbols on his hand, and the mysterious woman haunted my thoughts, leaving me with a sense of unease that I couldn't shake. To this day, I wonder about the true nature of that disturbing encounter during the night shift at the petrol station. It serves as a stark reminder that the darkness can hide secrets beyond our comprehension, and that sometimes the most unsettling horrors are the ones that defy explanation.
As a security guard, I had seen my fair share of eerie places during night shifts, but nothing could have prepared me for the horrors that unfolded during one fateful night at the abandoned Brookside Asylum. The Brookside Asylum was a sprawling, decaying complex that had once housed the mentally ill. Its ominous reputation had made it the stuff of local legend, and it had been abandoned for decades. The county had finally decided to demolish the derelict structure, and my job was to ensure that no trespassers entered the dangerous premises. I arrived at the site as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the crumbling buildings. The air was heavy with the scent of decay, and the rustling leaves in the overgrown courtyard added an eerie soundtrack to the night. I settled into my security booth, a small, weathered structure that had seen better days. My only company was the flickering fluorescent light above, the creaking of the building and the distant hoots of owls in the surrounding woods. The night began uneventfully. I made my rounds, checking the perimeter and ensuring that all doors and windows remained secure. As I walked the dimly lit corridors, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if the very walls of the asylum held a malevolent presence. Around midnight, as I sat in my booth reading a book to pass the time, a loud crash echoed through the stillness. I jumped to my feet, adrenaline coursing through my veins. It had come from deep within the asylum. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously ventured into the building, my footsteps echoing off the peeling wallpaper and decaying floors. The source of the noise eluded me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. As I made my way down a long, dimly lit corridor, I heard a faint whispering. The voices were muffled, as if coming from behind a closed door. My heart raced as I approached the source of the sound. The door was marked Patient Room 237, and the whispering seemed to emanate from within. I pushed it open slowly, revealing a room frozen in time. Dusty, moth-eaten curtains billowed in the faint breeze that drifted through the broken window. In the center of the room stood an old, rickety wheelchair, its wheels spinning slowly as if moved by unseen hands. The whispering grew louder, and I realized it was not coming from the room itself, but from the wheelchair. With trembling hands, I shone my flashlight on the empty chair. To my horror, it was rocking back and forth on its own, as if propelled by an invisible occupant. The whispering voices grew louder, filling the room with an incomprehensible cacophony. My instincts told me to flee, but I couldn't tear myself away. I took a step closer to the wheelchair, and the voices grew clearer, forming words that sent a chill down my spine. "Help us." The words echoed in my mind as I stumbled back from the room, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't explain what had just happened, but I knew I had to leave the asylum. As I made my way back to my security booth, I couldn't shake the feeling that something ancient and malevolent dwelled within the decaying walls of Brookside Asylum. I called my supervisor and told him I was quitting on the spot, unable to bear another moment within those haunted corridors. Days turned into weeks, and I tried to put the horrifying encounter behind me. But the memory of that night continued to haunt my dreams, and I couldn't escape the feeling that I had left something unfinished at the abandoned asylum. One night, unable to shake my curiosity, I returned to the asylum this time armed with a camera and a voice recorder. I had convinced myself that my initial experience had been a result of exhaustion or hallucination. As I ventured deeper into the complex, I could feel the oppressive weight of the building bearing down on me. The whispering voices returned, faint but unmistakable. I followed their eerie chorus, my heart pounding in my chest. The voices led me to a hidden chamber deep within the asylum, a chamber filled with the decaying remains of patients who had long been forgotten. Their empty eyes seemed to follow me as I entered the room. As I raised my camera to document the chilling scene, I heard a voice, soft and sorrowful, emanating from the darkness. "We are trapped here, forgotten by the world. Help us find peace." The voice seemed to come from all around me, and I knew that there was no escape. I had stumbled upon a malevolent force that had lingered in the asylum for decades, trapped in a never-ending nightmare. I fled the asylum, leaving my camera and recorder behind. I knew that no one would believe what I had witnessed, and I couldn't bear to relive the horrors through the evidence I had collected. To this day, I carry the weight of that night with me, haunted by the voices of the forgotten souls who still linger within the decaying walls of Brookside Asylum. I pray that someday they will find the peace they so desperately seek, and that their tormented whispers will finally be silenced.